Howdy readers and howdy film buffs. I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and I'm coming to you today with a brand new tag just created this weekend by my friend Lucy Rutherford, who's a booktuber down in Australia, and like me, she is a booktuber who loves movies as much as she loves books. So she created this tag, the A24 Movie Tag, and when I first saw the video, I mean, it was like an instant click kind of thing. So A24, for those of you who don't know, is it's a film distributor. It's a production company as well to some degree, but I think it's primarily a film distributor, and it is so in that sense, right? It's not like Universal or Paramount or Columbia. It's more like Focus Features or Fox Searchlight, now Searchlight. A24 is it's a distribution company that has, of all of those distributors from over the decades, has probably the most distinct fingerprint in terms of the kinds of movies that it releases, right? And Lucy talked about how A24 really tends to kind of release films that are really invested in character. There's also a kind of quirkiness to A24, and there's a kind of darkness to a lot of what A24 does. And I don't know, you just kind of... it makes me think of Winona Ryder in Reality Bites, right? When she's interviewing for a job at a newspaper, and the guy interviewing her says, "Define irony," and she can't define irony because it's a difficult word to define. But she says, "I know it when I see it," right? As he's closing the door on her. And A24 films are a little bit like that. You know one when you see one. So it's a cool idea for a tag. It's totally niche. Number one. Do you remember the first A24 movie you saw? And so I looked back through IMDb, and I rate things on the day that I see them. And I hardly ever re-rate movies, like, raise or lower my ratings. So I feel like the dates in there are pretty accurate. So the first A24 movie I ever saw was Obvious Child, directed by Gillian Robespierre, and that was on October 17th, 2014. Now, the first A24 movie I ever saw in the cinema, in the theater, was Ex Machina, directed by Alex Garland, and I saw that just some months later. It was May 9th, 2015. Number two, which A24 movie do you relate to the most? So this was interesting. So I'm going to give two examples here, two answers for this. One is The Green Knight, which is a pretty recent A24 film, directed by David Lowery. And the reason why I relate to The Green Knight, I suppose, is that I have always just really, really been interested in Arthurian myth and legend. I'm actually going to be doing a year-long project on my channel next year, focused on Arthuriana. And The Green Knight is it's just a beautiful, iconic Arthurian tale, right? It's more of a fable than anything else. But the other reason is that I've always really been fascinated by the figure of the Green Man. I used to have books about the Green Man, one or two books about the Green Man in the past, and I just love how, over centuries, his face would crop up in architecture. There are a couple episodes of Northern Exposure which feature the Green Man. So I've always just found him just a really interesting, mysterious figure. And so to have this, like I said, this iconic Arthurian tale featuring the Green Man, or an iteration of the Green Man, it's in my wheelhouse in a couple of different ways, that film. And then the other movie I chose that I relate to the most is one that I actually don't like very much, right? I don't dislike it, but I have a ton of problems with it. And that is Noah Baumbach's While We're Young. And I relate to that in large part because, Ben Stiller and Naomi Watts in the film they're getting older, right? I mean, they're about the same age that I am, right? Maybe a little bit younger than me, but they're feeling their age in ways that are really, really humorous. The problem is that the trailer for that movie is not only funnier than the movie, right? Because it condenses all the funny parts, but it also makes you believe that the film is something other than what it turns out to be. When Kelly and I saw While We're Young, we were incredibly disappointed because the trailer had led us down a particular path. The movie goes in a very different direction from where you're led to believe it will from the trailer. But even in that other direction, right, the Adam Driver character, there's a filmmaker character in the movie, and as many of you know, when I was a teenager, when I fell in love with cinema when I was 17, I wanted to be a director. Like that was my first really great dream in life, for my adult self, was to become a filmmaker. And I held on to it for quite a while, and I taught myself screenwriting, and entered one or two competitions, screenplay competitions over the years, and before eventually kind of giving up on that dream. So that film, even though I don't really like it that much, there's a lot in it that speaks to who I am, who I once was, who I wanted to be, etc., etc. So While We're Young is, along with The Green Knight, those are the two A24 films I relate to the most. Number 3, which A24 movie made you cry the most? So I went through the list of A24 releases on Wikipedia just to make sure, that I had seen enough to be able to warrant doing this tag. And I've seen 24, 25. And I think the only A24 film that I've seen that made me cry at all was, again, Gillian Robespierre's Obvious Child. And the scene, I won't spoil it for you, but the scene that made me just like burst into tears. I mean, I just burst into tears. I was sobbing. You see it in the trailer. It's the scene where the would-be boyfriend, right, is seen across the street with flowers, and and he has shown up to be a kind of moral support. Number 4, which A24 movie did you find the most disturbing? Well, that's easy. That would be Midsummer, or Midsommar, as my friend Juan would say. Directed by Ari Aster. And Lukash, from A Cruel Reader's Thesis, Lukash and my friend Dan and I went to see Midsummer at the theater when Lukash was here in town visiting me and Kelly. And there is a moment in that film. It involves two particularly elderly people. It involves heights, which I have a great fear of. But there's a moment. You'll know what moment I'm talking about. And I'm actually not talking about the moment that involves the mallet, even though that's fucked up too. I'm talking about, let's just say, the initial contact, okay, with stone. I would love to have seen what my face looked like in that moment, in that scene. Actually, all of our faces in the screening room. That was one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen in any film. So shocking that a filmmaker would go there, and go there in such a way. I mean, talk about feeling real. I'm not really sure how it was done, although I don't think it used CGI at all. If I remember right, it was all practical effects. Let's see, number 5. What movie is not an A24 movie, but seems like it should be? And for that, I chose Alfonso Gomez Rayon's Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which, for a lot of reasons, feels like an A24 film. So A24 has never really done any kind of family film at all. They're getting ready to do that with Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which looks like Lucy talked about it in her video. It looks absolutely delightful. And that would be their introduction into the world of family filmmaking. But I really do feel like Me and Earl and the Dying Girl would have been a really good first foray for them if they had picked up the distribution rights to that. Number 6, an A24 movie you disliked. So There are a number of A24 films that I've had a lot of issues with, but there are only two that the cons outweigh the pros. And those are The Florida Project, directed by Sean Baker, and First Reformed, directed by Paul Schrader. Now, First Reformed in particular, some of you are probably hearing that and saying, wow, Jason, that seems like a Jason movie, right? It's very maybe midrashy. Well, yes, it is. But it's also really, really didactic and heavy-handed in terms of like what the film has to say about climate change. The ending is colossally fucking stupid. One of the worst endings I've ever seen in a film. And then there's also just kind of just far as like the religious tone of the thing, right? Even some of the language in the film, it's just off somehow, right? Like there's a part, I can't remember if the priest is writing about it in his journal or whatever, if it's in voiceover, but he talks about how he fell asleep on a bench, and he's not on a fucking bench, he's in a pew. And like anyone who even just goes to church would never call a pew a bench, but a priest would certainly never refer to a pew as a bench, right? So it's just, I don't know, it just, religiously, it feels like a very clumsy, very lazy film. And then again, God, there's that ending, and in a way it's just so ham-fisted politically as well. Yeah, First Reformed is it's just not a very good film. And then The Florida Project, I was dying to see, but the movie just made me, it's weird, man, it's difficult to put my finger on, but there's something about the tone of that movie, something about the sensibility that I kind of infer in Sean Baker's style and his approach. It reminds me a little bit of Todd Solondz. They're both filmmakers whose films feel like a little bit exploitative to me. They feel morally dubious to me. And I don't know, man. I don't like that. Ostensibly the Florida Project seems to want, seems to love this main character and her daughter, right, down on their luck, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know that the film really does. It's presenting this character, it's presenting her in a way that is, it's really, really unflattering, and not even to the point where it's just, it's honest, right? It's presenting her in an honest way. I don't feel necessarily like it is. I feel like the Florida Project, to some degree, it feels a little bit like poverty porn to me, and I just don't like that. And Sean Baker's newest film, Red Rocket, which I think is also an A24 film, again, right? Like I watched the trailer, and I think, man, there's just something about this that just there's something about it that feels queasy to me, right? In Red Rocket, right? It's about a washed up middle-aged porn star who finds himself on some level maybe romancing an underage girl. Sounds problematic, but beyond that, it makes me think that there's something off about Sean Baker's sensibility. I don't know. The Florida Project, I was so excited to see it. It's a film that makes me suspicious of the motives of the director, I suppose. So anyway, number 7, have you ever DNF'd an A24 movie? I don't really give up on movies, partly because I rate things on Letterboxd and on IMDb, and I don't feel like I can, in good conscience, rate something that I haven't finished. And so if I want my rating to, however incrementally, drag the average down for that film, then I feel like I need to sit through the whole thing. So no, I don't DNF. movies. Number 8, an underrated A24 movie you want to give a shout out to, and that would be Saint Maud, directed by Rose Glass, who has probably the greatest name in all of cinema. Yeah, I can only imagine that that's actually her name, and maybe her parents were hippies or something. Anyhow, her film Saint Maud is really provocative. It's a kind of religious horror film, in some ways. Unlike First Reformed, it has a remarkable ending, just an absolutely chilling ending. That film is sort of everything that First Reformed was not for me. It's a movie that is not heavy-handed and didactic, and it's a movie that is really complex and really sensitive on the subject of religion, and it's also just really scary, and it's beautifully acted. It's so well acted, and they never once refer to a pew as a bench in Saint Maud, so it has that going for it. Number 9, which A24 movie have you not seen yet that you're most looking forward to? So Lucy chose this one, and I'll choose this as well. Marcella Shell with Shoes On, which I had mentioned, which is directed by Dean Fleischer Camp, who is the husband, if I remember right, of Jenny Slade, who is the lead actress in Obvious Child, which I've mentioned multiple times here, and she also voices Marcel. But as far as older A24 films that I haven't seen yet, that I've been wanting to see for years now, I would choose A Most Violent Year, directed by J.C. Chandor. I think that looks just remarkably good. Big fan of Jessica Chastain and Oscar Isaac both. And then finally, the last prompt, number 10, your favorite A24 movie, and that would be David Lowery's A Ghost Story, which I have made a whole video about back when I did my year-long mortality project called You Carry a Coffin Today. Talk about a film that has, for me anyway, in my history of movie watching, it has no precedent at all. It just feels utterly original and utterly poignant, and and just strange and mysterious and just heartrending. A little bit frightening at times, a little bit funny at times, but yeah, just the kind of film that it seems like a filmmaker would have to be crazy to even dream up, let alone attempt. And David Lowery, man, he did it, right? He is just one of these directors. I'm fond of talking about how there's a kind of renaissance happening in filmmaking right now. There are a number of directors who were born within like 5 years of each other, who are just doing astounding work, right? David Lowery, Chloe Zhao, Robert Eggers, Celine Sciamma. There are one or two others, and they're all like in their late 30s to mid 40s, right? Like they're kind of all between like 38 and 43 or 44 years old, and they're just fucking brilliant. And yeah, I think A Ghost Story is David Lowery's most brilliant film in a short career so far of nothing but really brilliant movies. So anyhow, I can't wait for his version of Peter Pan, which we're going to be getting later this year. But anyhow, that's it. I'm not going to tag anybody because, again, there aren't a lot of booktubers who talk about movies. There aren't a lot of booktubers who are even going to kind of know what A24 is. But a few of you will. And so if you've seen this video or Lucy's video, hop on Wikipedia, look up A24, scroll through their list of films that they've released since their inception. And if you've seen enough of them, put a list together, right, and give us your version of this. I would love to see it. But anyway, my friends, I will leave it there, and I'm going to head upstairs and spend most of the rest of the day reading. And I will talk to you guys again very soon. Adios.